Captain Rex Holloway had survived 3 engine failures, 2 pirate attacks, and one very memorable incident involving fermented Regelliant fruit that he preferred not to discuss. None of those experiences had prepared him for finding a stranded woman with malfunctioning life support gear near the abandoned Meridian station on Kepler 442b. His cargo hauler, the Rusty Comet, wasn't much to look at, 40 years old, held together with determination and creative welding, but she'd never failed to bring him home. Rex took pride in that reliability, even if his bank account wished he'd chosen a more profitable line of work than helping stranded travelers and running supplies to remote mining colonies. The distress beacon had been weak, almost lost in the background radiation from the nearby pulsar. Rex might have missed it entirely if he hadn't been running a full-spectrum scan while trying to locate a supposedly lucrative salvage site that turned out to be nothing but space debris and broken dreams. He found her sitting on a chunk of metallic asteroid, her environmental suit's display blinking ominously red. The sight of someone in genuine distress triggered Rex's rescue instincts faster than his common sense could intervene, a character trait that explained both his perpetual financial difficulties and his ability to sleep soundly at night. Well, this is either a perfectly timed rescue or the universe's idea of a practical joke, he muttered into his calm as he maneuvered the comet closer to the stranded figure. The woman looked up as his ship approached, raising one hand in a gesture that managed to convey both gratitude and dignity despite her precarious situation. Rex activated his external speakers, hoping his universal translator would handle whatever language she spoke. "Looks like you're having a rough day," he called out. "Lucky for you, I specialize in rough days. Need a lift?" Her response came in perfect standard Galactic, though with an accent he couldn't place, something that suggested distant stars and formal education. "That would be most appreciated, Captain. My environmental systems have experienced what I believe the technical term is catastrophic failure." Rex grinned despite the seriousness of the situation. Anyone who could maintain a sense of humor while facing suffocation in the vacuum of space was his kind of person. "Catastrophic failure is my specialty. Let me get the cargo bay depressurized and we'll have you aboard in no time." As he maneuvered his ship into position, Rex got his first good look at the stranded woman. She appeared human in most respects, the right number of limbs in the right proportions, facial features that followed familiar patterns. But her ears swept upward in elegant curves that definitely weren't standard human anatomy. The pointed tips added an almost ethereal quality to her appearance, like something from the old fairy tales his grandmother used to tell. Her equipment was clearly high-end, the kind of gear that cost more than Rex's ship, but it had obviously taken a beating. Scorch marks suggested an encounter with something energetic and unfriendly, while the blinking red warnings indicated her life support had maybe an hour left at best. The rescue went smoothly, which immediately made Rex suspicious. In his experience, when things went too well, the universe was usually preparing to balance the scales with something catastrophically complicated. But the woman, who introduced herself simply as Vera, seemed genuinely grateful and refreshingly uncomplicated. "I cannot thank you enough, Captain," she said once they were safely aboard and she'd removed her damaged helmet. Her hair fell in dark waves that somehow managed to look elegant despite having been compressed under emergency headgear for who knew how long. "Your timing was impeccable." "Rex Holloway," he replied, extending his hand in greeting. "And timing had nothing to do with it. I was actually looking for a salvage site that turned out to be about as valuable as a chocolate teapot." Vera's handshake was firm and warm, and Rex felt an odd little shock when their fingers touched, probably static discharge from the ship's recycled atmosphere. "Vera," she replied simply. "And I suspect your failed salvage mission was more fortunate than you realize." Rex led her through the Comet's cramped corridors to the small passenger cabin he'd retrofitted for exactly these kinds of situations. The space wasn't luxurious, barely large enough for a bunk and a small table, but it was clean and functional. "It's not the Grand Hotel on Rigel Prime," he said, suddenly conscious of his ship's shabby condition, "but the environmental systems work and the coffee's only mildly toxic." "It's perfect," Vera said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I've stayed in far worse accommodations." Rex found himself studying her face, looking for signs of the polite dishonesty that usually accompanied such statements. Instead, he saw only genuine appreciation in something that might have been relief. Whatever had brought her to this remote corner of space, she seemed genuinely grateful for simple kindness. "So," he said, settling into the cabin's single chair while she took the bunk, "what brings you to this delightful corner of nowhere? Tourism? Scientific research? Fleeing from an arranged marriage to someone with too many tentacles?" Vera's laugh was like music played on instruments he'd never heard but immediately wanted to learn. "Something like that. Family business, you might say. Sometimes it's necessary to step away from obligations for a while." Rex nodded sympathetically. "Family business can be complicated. My cousin tried to get me involved in his guaranteed profitable shipping venture once. Turned out he was smuggling Altarian mood beetles, which are apparently both illegal and prone to escape from their containers when agitated." "That sounds like an adventure," Vera said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Adventure is just trouble with better marketing," Rex replied. "But it taught me to stick with honest work, even if it means eating reconstituted protein bars more often than I'd like." He gestured toward the small food synthesizer mounted in the corner. "Speaking of which, are you hungry? I can offer you the finest selection of nutrition-packed, flavor-optional meals that credits can buy." "That sounds wonderful," Vera said, and again, she seemed to mean it. As Rex programmed the synthesizer, he found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passenger. There was something about her that didn't quite fit, the expensive equipment, the refined mannerisms, the way she seemed genuinely delighted by his ship's modest amenities. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that suggested someone accustomed to better circumstances, but without the condescension he'd encountered from wealthy passengers in the past. "So, Rex," she said as they shared a meal of reconstituted chicken and vegetables that tasted almost, but not quite, like the real thing, "tell me about your work. What draws someone to life on the frontier?" It was a simple question, but the way she asked it, with genuine interest rather than polite conversation, made Rex find himself talking more than he usually did with passengers. He told her about the satisfaction of helping stranded travelers, about the independence of running his own ship, about his dream of eventually upgrading to something reliable enough to establish regular rescue routes through the more dangerous sectors. Vera listened with the kind of attention that made Rex feel like his stories actually mattered, asking thoughtful questions and sharing observations that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of galactic politics and trade routes. "You know," Rex said as they finished their meal, "for someone dealing with family business, you seem to know an awful lot about interstellar commerce." Vera's smile carried secrets. Family business can be quite extensive. Outside the viewport, the stars of Kepler 442b's night sky began to appear as the planet rotated away from its primary. Rex had seen thousands of alien sunsets, but somehow, sharing this one with Vera made it feel special. "Well," he said, settling back in his chair, "whatever brought you out here, I'm glad our paths crossed. It's been a while since I've had company that didn't involve someone shooting at me or trying to sell me something I can't afford." "The pleasure has been entirely mine, Captain," Vera replied, and Rex could have sworn he heard something wistful in her voice. "It's been refreshing to meet someone who sees me as simply myself." Rex wasn't sure what to make of that comment, but before he could ask, Vera stifled a yawn behind one elegant hand. "You should get some rest," he said, standing up. "Tomorrow we can work on getting your gear functional again. I'm not much of an engineer, but I know my way around environmental systems." "Thank you, Rex," she said softly. "For everything." As Rex headed back to the bridge, he found himself wondering about Vera's story. Family business, expensive equipment, and a way of speaking that suggested she was accustomed to more formal situations. Whatever she was running from, or toward, he hoped she'd find what she was looking for. Behind him, Vera settled onto the small bunk and stared out at the alien stars, a small smile playing at her lips. It had been a long time since someone had offered her kindness without expecting anything in return, and even longer since she'd been able to simply be herself without the weight of titles and expectations. For the first time in months, Empress Viridian Astra fell asleep without worrying about the fate of empires. Rex woke to the sound of someone humming softly in his ship's galley, a melody he didn't recognize but found oddly soothing. He'd fallen asleep at the helm again, a habit that probably explained his persistent neck problems, and the chronometer showed he'd managed nearly 6 hours of uninterrupted rest. Given his usual pattern of worry-induced insomnia, this qualified as a minor miracle. "Morning, Captain," Vera called as he shuffled toward the coffee synthesizer, his hair pointing in directions that defied several laws of physics. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of recalibrating your atmospheric processors. The oxygen-carbon dioxide balance was slightly off." Rex paused in his coffee preparation, suddenly more awake. "You recalibrated my atmospheric processors? That's not exactly basic knowledge." "I may have understated my technical background slightly," Vera said with a smile that managed to be both apologetic and mischievous. "Family business tends to involve a variety of practical skills." She was wearing one of his spare coveralls, the utilitarian garment somehow looking elegant on her despite being 3 sizes too large. Her damaged equipment lay spread across his workbench in the cargo bay, and Rex could see she'd been busy disassembling components with surgical precision. "Well, as long as we're not going to suffocate in our sleep, I appreciate the help," Rex said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. He took a sip and blinked in surprise. "This actually tastes like coffee. Real coffee." "I may have made a few adjustments to the synthesizer's flavor protocols as well," Vera admitted. The original settings were optimistic about what constituted palatable. Rex laughed, settling onto a crate beside her makeshift workspace. "You know, most people who need rescuing don't immediately start improving my ship. Are you sure you're not some kind of engineer?" "Among other things," Vera replied, her attention focused on a component that looked like it belonged in a starship engine rather than personal equipment. "Tell me, Rex, how long have you been running rescue missions?" "About 8 years, ever since I bought the comet from a Centauran trader who swore she was in perfect condition," Rex said, watching Vera's hands move with practiced expertise among the delicate mechanisms. Turned out his definition of perfect was fairly creative, but she's been good to me. "And the rescue work? That was always your plan?" Rex considered the question while sipping his surprisingly excellent coffee. "Not exactly. I started out doing standard cargo runs, but I kept running into people who needed help, stranded miners, researchers with broken equipment, families whose ships had mechanical failures in dangerous sectors. Seemed wrong to just fly past. Even though it's not particularly profitable. Credits aren't everything," Rex shrugged. "Besides, I sleep better knowing I've helped someone than I would counting money while people suffered." Vera looked up from her work, something unreadable in her expression. "That's a philosophy that's becoming rarer in the galaxy." "Maybe," Rex said. "But it's the one my parents taught me. They ran a medical clinic on the frontier, spent their lives helping people who couldn't afford fancy treatments on the core worlds. They sound like remarkable people. They were. They always said the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they're willing to give." Rex gestured at Vera's equipment. "Speaking of which, how's the repair work going?" "Better than expected, actually. Your tools are well maintained, and you have some components I can cannibalize for parts." She held up a crystal-like device that pulsed with internal light. "Though I have to ask, where did you get quantum-grade power cells? These aren't exactly standard cargo hauler equipment." Rex felt his cheeks warm slightly. "I may have invested a bit more in ship upgrades than was strictly financially prudent. Figure if I'm going to be running rescues in dangerous sectors, I should have reliable equipment." "Prudent or not, it may save both our lives," Vera said. "My communication array took more damage than I initially realized. Without quantum-grade power cells, I won't be able to send a distress signal powerful enough to reach my people." "Your people being your family?" Something like that. Vera's voice carried that same careful vagueness he'd noticed the night before. They'll be worried about my extended absence. Rex nodded, accepting the non-explanation with the easy tolerance that had made him popular among passengers with complicated pasts. In his experience, people shared their stories when they were ready, and pushing usually just made them uncomfortable. They worked together throughout the morning, Rex's practical knowledge of ship systems complementing Vera's sophisticated understanding of advanced technology. She guided him through repairs that should have been beyond his skill level, her patient explanations making complex quantum mechanics seem almost comprehensible. "You're a good teacher," Rex said as they successfully restored power to her environmental suit. "Ever consider a career in education?" "I've done my share of instructing others," Vera replied. "Though usually in less pleasant circumstances than this." "Well, whatever your usual circumstances are, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. The comet's not much, but she's got reliable life support and decent food synthesizers, now that you've fixed them." Vera's smile was warm and genuinely grateful. "You're very kind, Rex. It's been a long time since someone offered me hospitality without expecting anything in return." "What would I expect? You're already earning your keep by making my ship run better than it has in years." They shared lunch in the observation lounge, a small chamber Rex had converted from a storage bay to give passengers a view of space during long journeys. Kepler 442b's primary star painted the cabin in warm golden light, and the planet's rings created patterns of shadow and brilliance across the deck. "It's beautiful," Vera said, watching the play of light through the viewport. "Do you ever tire of sights like this?" "Never," Rex replied honestly. "Every system is different, every planet has its own character. Sometimes I think the universe puts on shows just for people willing to pay attention." "That's a lovely way to see it." Vera's voice carried something wistful. "I'm afraid I often get so caught up in obligations and responsibilities that I forget to simply observe." "Family business keeping you busy?" "You could say that. There are always decisions to make, people depending on you, crises that demand immediate attention." She turned from the viewport to look at Rex. "What about you? No family depending on Captain Holloway?" "Just me and the comet," Rex said. "Never seem to have time for anything more complicated. Hard to maintain a relationship when you're constantly flying off to rescue strangers in distant sectors." "That must be lonely sometimes." "Sometimes," Rex admitted. "But then I meet someone interesting, share a few days of good conversation, and remember why I do this work." Their eyes met across the small table, and Rex felt that same odd little shock he'd experienced when they first shook hands. Vera's amber eyes seemed to hold depths he couldn't fathom, and for a moment he found himself wondering what it would be like to know her beyond these brief days of shared circumstance. The moment was interrupted by his communication array's proximity alarm. Rex frowned, checking the readings on his portable scanner. "That's odd," he said. "I'm picking up encrypted transmissions on multiple frequencies. Someone's having a very busy conversation in languages my translator can't parse." Vera's expression shifted subtly, the relaxed contentment of moments before replaced by something that looked like alertness tinged with concern. "Probably just merchant traffic," she said, but her voice had lost its casual tone. "This system is on several major trade routes." Rex nodded, accepting the explanation even as his pilot's instincts whispered that something felt off. The transmissions had an urgency to them, a pattern that suggested coordination rather than casual commerce. "Well," he said, standing up and stretching, "whatever it is, it's not our problem. Want to help me recalibrate the navigation sensors? I've been meaning to update the stellar cartography database." "Of course," Vera replied, but Rex noticed she kept glancing at the communication displays, her earlier ease replaced by something that looked suspiciously like watchfulness. As they worked through the afternoon, Rex found himself studying his passenger with growing curiosity. The expensive equipment, the sophisticated technical knowledge, the way she deflected personal questions with practiced skill, everything pointed to someone far more important than a simple traveler dealing with family business. But as the day progressed and Vera's natural warmth reasserted itself, Rex decided he didn't care about mysteries. Whatever her story was, she was good company, a skilled technician, and someone who seemed to genuinely appreciate simple kindness. If she wanted to keep her secrets, that was her business. He was just glad fate had brought them together, even if it was only temporary. Outside the viewport, Kepler 442b's rings continued their ancient dance, beautiful and eternal and utterly indifferent to the small dramas of the beings who passed through their light. Rex's morning routine was interrupted by the distinctive sound of metal impacting regolith at high velocity, followed by what his sensors politely categorized as unscheduled atmospheric entry. In less technical terms, something had just crashed about 2 kilometers from their position, and the energy reading suggested it hadn't been a controlled landing. "Well, that's either a very large meteorite or someone's having a worse day than we are," Rex said, pulling up the sensor data on his main display. "Looks like a small ship, probably single occupant." Vera appeared at his shoulder with the fluid grace he'd come to associate with her movements, studying the readouts with obvious concern. "Life signs? Faint but present. Whoever it is, they're alive but probably not in great shape." Rex was already reaching for his emergency medical kit. "I'd better go check on them." "I'll come with you," Vera said immediately. Rex paused in his preparations. "Are you sure? Crash sites can be dangerous, and if there are injuries." "I have medical training," Vera replied, and something in her tone suggested this wasn't a casual claim. "Among other skills." They made their way across Kepler 442b's rocky terrain in Rex's surface vehicle, a sturdy all-terrain crawler that had seen better decades but remained reliable. The crashed ship was a sleek scout vessel of a design Rex didn't recognize, its hull scarred by energy weapons and its landing gear deployed too late to prevent significant impact damage. "Looks like someone was in a hurry," Rex observed, scanning the wreckage for signs of immediate danger. "And not alone, those scorch marks suggest they were being chased." They found the pilot pinned under a collapsed support beam, conscious but clearly in significant pain. The being appeared to be Altarian, with the characteristic blue-tinted skin and ridge-like bone structures along the forehead, though blood loss made positive identification difficult. "Easy there," Rex said, activating his universal translator and kneeling beside the injured pilot. "We're here to help. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" The pilot's eyes focused on Rex with obvious effort. "Must find her. Empress, disappeared, fleet's searching." "He's delirious," Rex said, beginning his medical assessment. "Probably has a concussion along with these other injuries. Help me stabilize this beam so we can get him free." Vera moved to assist, but when the pilot's gaze fell on her, his reaction was immediate and startling. Despite his injuries, he attempted to sit up, his eyes widening with what looked like recognition mixed with relief. "Your Imperial Majesty," he gasped, speaking in a language Rex's translator couldn't parse. "The consortium, they've been searching, the markets are in chaos." Vera's response was swift and sharp, a few words in the same untranslatable language that had the effect of immediately silencing the pilot. She then knelt beside him, her demeanor shifting from concerned companion to something that suggested command authority. "He's definitely delirious," she said to Rex, but her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there moments before. "Head injuries can cause all sorts of confused thinking." Rex nodded, focused on his medical procedures, but something nagged at him. The pilot's reaction had been too specific, too immediate for simple delirium. And the words he'd caught, Empress, searching, fleets, painted a picture that made Rex's rescue instincts tingle with concern. They managed to extract the pilot from the wreckage and transport him back to the Comet, where Rex's small but well-equipped medical bay provided better facilities for treatment. The Altarian drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering in languages that seemed to agitate Vera despite her claims not to understand him. "His injuries aren't life-threatening," Rex reported after completing his examination. "Concussion, some internal bruising, and a fractured arm, but nothing that won't heal with proper rest and medical attention." That's fortunate, Vera said, though she seemed distracted, frequently checking the ship's external sensors. Vera, Rex said carefully, is there something you're not telling me? That pilot seemed to recognize you, and some of the things he said. Head injuries can cause all sorts of confused perceptions, Vera replied smoothly. I'm sure he mistook me for someone else. Rex wanted to pursue the question, but before he could formulate his concerns properly, the pilot regained consciousness. This time, his reaction to seeing Vera was even more pronounced. He attempted to rise from the medical bed despite his injuries, speaking rapidly in that same untranslatable language. Vera's response was firm and immediate, clearly giving orders that the pilot reluctantly acknowledged. Rex watched this exchange with growing curiosity and concern. He says he's grateful for our assistance, Vera translated, though Rex suspected the actual conversation had been considerably more complex. Apparently, he was fleeing raiders when his ship malfunctioned. Raiders who happened to have military-grade energy weapons. Rex asked, gesturing toward the scorch marks they'd observed on the crashed vessel. The frontier can be dangerous, Vera said, but her evasiveness was becoming more obvious. That evening, as they shared dinner in the observation lounge, Rex found himself studying Vera with new attention. The expensive equipment, the technical expertise, the way she'd handled the injured pilot, all of it pointed towards someone with significant training and resources. Vera, he said finally, I want you to know that whatever your story is, it doesn't change anything between us. You helped repair my ship, you've been excellent company, and you've shown nothing but kindness since you've been aboard. She looked up from her meal, something vulnerable in her expression. Thank you, Rex. That means more to me than you might realize. But if you're in some kind of trouble, if there are people looking for you who might pose a danger to others, I would never knowingly put you at risk, Vera said quickly. If I thought my presence here endangered you, I would leave immediately. That's not what I'm worried about, Rex replied. I'm worried about you. Whatever situation you're running from, you don't have to face it alone. Vera's smile was soft and genuinely touched. You're a remarkable man, Rex Holloway. In a galaxy full of people who see others as opportunities or obstacles, you see them as simply, people. Is that so unusual? More than you know, she said quietly. Especially for someone in my circumstances. Before Rex could ask what she meant by that, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. Rex rushed to the sensor station, his face going pale as he read the incoming data. That's impossible, he muttered, running the scans again. What is it? Vera asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Ships, Rex said, staring at readings that defied comprehension. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. And they're not merchant vessels. These are warships, luxury cruisers, vessels I'm seeing Imperial designation codes. He turned to look at Vera, who stood watching the sensor displays with an expression of resignation mixed with something that might have been relief. The Imperial fleet, Rex said slowly. They're here for you, aren't they? Vera met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't deflect or evade. Yes, she said simply. They are. Outside the viewport, the first of the magnificent ships began appearing against the star field, their hulls gleaming with the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of unlimited resources and centuries of refined engineering. Rex had seen pictures of Imperial vessels in news feeds, but witnessing them in person was like comparing a candle to a star. So, he said, trying to process what he was seeing, when you said family business. I meant it quite literally, Vera replied. Though perhaps I should have been more specific about the nature of the family. As they watched, more ships continued to arrive, transforming the quiet space around Kepler 442b into a display of power that made Rex's modest cargo hauler seem about as significant as a grain of sand on a beach. Well, he said finally, this certainly explains why your equipment was so expensive. Despite everything, Vera laughed, the same musical sound that had charmed him from the beginning. Oh, Rex, she said, if only all my problems could be solved with such gracious acceptance. So what happens now? Rex asked, watching as a shuttle launched from the flagship, its trajectory clearly aimed at their position. Now, Vera said, you meet my family. And I try to explain why I've been hiding among the stars instead of attending to my responsibilities. She turned to face him, and Rex saw both gratitude and sadness in her amber eyes. Thank you, Rex. For everything. But especially for these few days when I could just be Vera. As the shuttle approached, Rex found himself wondering exactly who Vera really was, and why someone with access to that kind of power would choose to travel alone in damaged equipment through the outer reaches of space. He had a feeling he was about to find out. Rex had imagined many scenarios for how his rescue mission might conclude, but none of them had involved being surrounded by what appeared to be half the Imperial fleet while their shuttlecraft prepared to dock with his cargo hauler. The sheer scale of the operation was overwhelming, vessels that could house entire cities, escort ships whose individual firepower exceeded most planetary defense systems, and a flagship so large it seemed to bend space around itself. I'm starting to think your family might be slightly more influential than you initially mentioned, Rex said, watching the shuttle approach through his viewports. Unless this is standard procedure for picking up relatives who've had transportation difficulties. Vera stood beside him, her posture straighter than he'd seen it since they'd met, though she still wore his oversized coveralls. Rex, there's something you should know before they arrive. Let me guess, Rex said with a wry smile. You're not actually from a merchant family dealing with routine business complications. Not exactly, no. Vera turned to face him, and Rex saw a mixture of regret and determination in her expression. My name is Viridian Astra. I'm the Empress of the Centauran Empire. Rex stared at her for a long moment, processing this information with the methodical care of someone whose brain was refusing to accept obvious reality. Empress. As in, ruler of roughly 40% of known space. Roughly 42%, actually, though the exact percentage fluctuates with various territorial agreements. Vera, Viridian, managed a small smile. I realize this is somewhat unexpected. Somewhat unexpected, Rex repeated slowly. Right. So when I've been sharing reconstituted protein bars with you and complaining about the state of galactic commerce, I've actually been having dinner with someone who genuinely appreciated both the food and the conversation, Viridian finished. That hasn't changed, Rex. The shuttle completed its docking sequence with Rex's airlock, and he could hear the formal procedures of diplomatic arrival beginning, multiple personnel, security protocols, and what sounded like someone conducting ceremonial preparations. Your Majesty, Rex said, testing the title awkwardly, I probably should have been more formal if I'd known. Please don't, Viridian said quickly. The past few days have been the first time in years that someone has treated me like a person rather than a position. I'd like to keep that for a few more minutes. Before Rex could respond, the airlock cycled open and a small procession entered his ship. The lead figure was clearly a high-ranking military officer, her uniform bearing insignia that Rex recognized from galactic news feeds as belonging to the Imperial Guard. Behind her came what appeared to be a mixture of advisors, security personnel, and someone carrying an ornate container that probably contained ceremonial items. Your Imperial Majesty, the officer said, executing a formal bow that somehow managed to convey both relief and mild reproach. The Empire rejoices at your safe recovery. Commander Thrace, Viridian replied, her voice taking on the formal cadence of someone accustomed to official interactions. I trust the search proceeded without incident. Minimal complications, Your Majesty, though several trading consortiums have been concerned about the market fluctuations caused by your absence. Rex watched this exchange with growing amazement. This was the same woman who had laughed at his stories about smuggling mood beetles and helped him recalibrate his atmospheric processors. Now she was discussing imperial policy with the casual authority of someone who shaped the destiny of billions. The person with the ornate container stepped forward, opening it to reveal what Rex could only describe as armor fit for a goddess. The pieces were crafted from some material that seemed to capture and hold starlight, flowing like liquid mercury but clearly solid. It was the same armor he'd seen her wearing when they first met, though now he understood its significance. "Your Imperial regalia, Majesty," the attendant said with reverent formality. Viridian accepted the armor with practiced ease, and Rex watched in fascination as the pieces seemed to flow onto her body, transforming her from the woman in borrowed coveralls into something that belonged in the pages of galactic history. The change was remarkable, not just in her appearance, but in her entire presence. She became someone who could command fleets and reshape civilizations with a word. "Captain Holloway," Commander Thrace said, turning her attention to Rex with an expression of professional assessment. "The Empire is grateful for your assistance to Her Majesty." "I just did what anyone would do," Rex replied, feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the formal attention. "Actually," Viridian interjected, "he did considerably more than that." She moved toward Rex, her armor making no sound despite its apparent weight. "Commander Thrace, Captain Holloway provided shelter, assistance, and companionship without asking for anything in return. More importantly, he treated me with kindness and respect without knowing who I was. That's commendable, Your Majesty, but standard protocol requires." "Protocol can wait," Viridian said with the quiet authority of someone unaccustomed to having her decisions questioned. "Captain Holloway, would you mind if we spoke privately for a moment?" The various officials and attendants withdrew to a respectful distance, though Rex suspected they remained close enough to intervene if necessary. Viridian gestured toward the observation lounge, and they walked together through his modest ship, now made to seem even more humble by the presence of Imperial regalia. "So," Rex said once they were alone, "I guess this is where you tell me this was all a test of some kind, or a diplomatic mission, Oregon. This is where I tell you that the past few days have been the most genuine human connection I've experienced in years," Viridian said simply. "Do you have any idea how rare it is for someone to see me as just me?" Rex settled into his familiar chair, gesturing for her to take the seat across from him, the same arrangement they'd shared for meals and conversation. "I imagine being an empress comes with certain complications in the personal relationship department. Everyone wants something," she said, accepting the seat with a grace that somehow made his simple furniture seem elegant. "Trade agreements, territorial concessions, marriages for political alliance, military support. I can't remember the last time someone offered me help simply because I needed it." "Well," Rex said, "for what it's worth, I enjoyed our time together too. Even if I did spend most of it completely misunderstanding who I was talking to." Viridian smiled, and Rex saw a flash of the woman who had shared reconstituted meals and laughed at his stories. "You understood exactly who I was, Rex. You just didn't know what I was. So what happens now? You return to ruling the galaxy, and I go back to my rescue missions?" "That depends," Viridian said, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me about your dream again. The one about expanding your rescue operations." Rex felt his cheeks warm. "That was just wishful thinking. The kind of ship I'd need, the resources for proper medical equipment, communication arrays powerful enough to coordinate with emergency services. It would cost more than I could earn in several lifetimes. What if cost wasn't a consideration?" "I'm sorry." Viridian's eyes held the same enthusiasm Rex had seen when he'd first described his dreams, but now it carried the weight of unlimited resources. "The Empire has a Department of Frontier Services that coordinates emergency response in remote sectors. They could use someone with your experience and dedication." "Viridian, I can't accept charity." "It wouldn't be charity," she said firmly. "It would be employment. The Empire needs people who understand that the value of a life isn't measured in credits or political influence. People who would risk their own safety to help strangers." Rex stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you the resources to do what you're already doing, but on a scale that could help thousands of people." Viridian stood, moving to the viewport where they had shared so many conversations. "The frontier is vast, Rex. There are countless people who need exactly the kind of help you've been providing. And you do this because Because, she said, turning back to face him, you treated an injured stranger with kindness. You shared your food, your tools, your ship, and your stories without expecting anything in return. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Rex joined her at the viewport, looking out at the assembled fleet that represented power beyond his comprehension. It seems like a fairly large reward for basic human decency. Basic human decency is rarer than you think, Viridian said softly. Especially in positions of power. Do you know what most people say when they meet me? I'm guessing it's not, nice to meet you, want some coffee? They say, Your Imperial Majesty, how may I serve the Empire? Or, Your Majesty, I have a proposition that would benefit us both. She smiled at the memory. You said, looks like you're having a rough day, need a lift? Rex felt something warm settle in his chest. Well, you did look like you were having a rough day. The roughest in quite some time, she agreed. But also, it turned out, one of the best. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars that had brought them together. Finally, Rex spoke. If I accepted this position, would I see you again? The Department of Frontier Services reports directly to the Imperial Administration, Viridian said carefully. There would be regular briefings, progress reviews, resource allocation meetings. That sounds very official. It would be, she agreed. Though I suspect the department head might occasionally find herself in need of field assessment visits to evaluate rescue operations in remote sectors. Rex grinned. That does sound like the kind of thorough oversight and efficient administration would require. I've always believed in hands-on management. Commander Thrace's voice came from the corridor, respectfully interrupting their conversation. Your Majesty, the Council is requesting your presence for urgent matters of state. The markets have been volatile during your absence. Viridian sighed, the weight of Empire settling back onto her shoulders. Of course they have. Duty calls, it seems. She turned to Rex one final time. Think about my offer, Captain Holloway. The galaxy needs more people willing to help strangers, and I. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I need more people who see me as Viridian rather than just an empress. I'll think about it, Rex promised. Though I have to warn you, I'm still going to complain about the quality of synthesized coffee, even in Imperial service. I wouldn't expect anything less, she said, her smile bright enough to outshine the stars beyond the viewport. As the Imperial entourage prepared to depart, Rex found himself standing in his empty ship, surrounded by the lingering scent of ozone and starlight. His communication console chimed with an incoming message bearing official Imperial seals, containing job offers, ship specifications, and resources that would transform his modest rescue operations into something that could reach across the galaxy. But more than that, it contained a personal note in Viridian's handwriting, for the man who offered kindness to a stranger and asked for nothing in return. The universe needs more people like you. V. Rex looked out at the departing fleet, watching as the magnificent ships prepared to jump to hyperspace and return their empress to the business of ruling civilizations. In a few hours, this sector would be quiet again, empty except for the stars and the possibilities they represented. He activated his response console and began composing his acceptance message. After all, how often did someone get the chance to turn their dreams into reality while working for the most powerful woman in the galaxy, who also happened to make excellent coffee and laugh at terrible jokes about smuggled mood beetles? As he wrote, Rex smiled, thinking about field assessment visits and the promise of seeing Viridian again among the stars they both loved. Some rescues, he reflected, ended up saving more than just the people you set out to help.